So let's move to our Visual Studio. Now, I don't have anything yet because I want to make a new development. So I'm not going to use an existing development or protocol to get started with, but just from a blank sheet. Now, when you have Data Miner Integration Studio installed, you already have a lots of templates and help features basically to get you on the road. What I'm going to do first is open up a new file. And you can see I can select different types, and I'm going to work with a protocol here. So I'm going to select Data Miner Protocol template. This will create my skeleton of a protocol with the most common used components in there. I find the DIS tree always a very nice means to get or keep and get that overview of what you are basically developing. And I like to see these things as different building blocks. So let's have a closer look. When I select my name, my cursor will jump to that name. When I will select on different components, let's jump to groups, it will also go in my code behind to the groups itself. So in the beginning, or on the top of my development, I actually have a bit of information linked to that protocol I want to create. First thing we will need to do is decide on a name. Now this is purely a test to get to know my first protocol. So I'm going to call it test protocol. And I can make a description indicating this is my first test. Now, when we are building a real development, you will give it a nice proper name to indicate the purpose of this need. This could be your name of your data source, could be the vendor and the name of the purpose. It could be a managing component, could be quite anything, a virtual indication, or it could be a specific communication that you have to put up with an API that is out there. Try and make your name as user-friendly as possible, because that will be the name shown in Data Miner. When you select an element, you will need to select a protocol from a list, and if you have a very nice name, you will know what to use for what situation. We will also need to register this protocol definition, so normally you will get a nice ID. In my case, I'm just going to use 000. Provider, in my case, this is Skyline Communication, so let's put my vendor. It's not a vendor yet, it's just a test development, but this could be your, or should be your vendor. I'm just going to call it Skyline in this case. Also the vendor OID, your ID itself linked to that vendor, I'm going to call it 00 again, because this is all part of a test development. So you can do the same. Change this to 000 as long as this is not a real development. Now, in my case, I'm not yet going to communicate with any data source. We're going to take the first steps in our development, so let's just keep it all virtual. So my type, which is defined here, I'm going to set this to virtual. This is my first header that I'm building now. You can see this in my tree as well. It filled it up with the info that I have. So the most important items for now are my name. That's the name that I'm going to see in my protocol list in Data Miner. My version. This was automatically filled in with the template. It's the 1001. The last number will be my iteration. The first three numbers will indicate the range, the impact that will bring if I would change my version numbering. For instance, when I have a firmware update, logic has changed, or the way to deal with this has changed. Maybe specific alarmings have updated as well. Maybe some names have changed in there. In that case, we want to clearly indicate there is an impact. Maybe for the person viewing this or the system itself. history will be removed. It's quite a big impact. Or instead of using this particular filter in your alarm template, you will need to change it to a different one. So I will need to do something manual. Of course, this will be indicated in our version history as well, so you can get a nice pop-up window indicating this is the impact, these are the changes in there. But still, just by looking at the range, as soon as you change between two ranges, you'll know there is some impact. What impact? That's defined in our version history. We have a header block. I know I didn't explain all the details, but we don't need to run, we can just walk for now. What other components are in here? Here, my building blocks, I have params. These will become my parameters that I see on display. Could also be internal logic. I would like to keep a flag somewhere. Could be my parameter as well. So it could be displayed, could be not displayed. With the displayed items, I still have a difference there as well. I can show it on my screen in a data page somewhere, or I just want to make it available for another component in Data Miner. Maybe my automation component needs to be able to set something in this specific development or in this driver, but it doesn't need to be shown on a page. It's like an internal flow. Run this now. I'm going to trigger that flow. I don't need a button. I just want my automation to trigger that particular flow. We also have something called quick actions. What are quick actions? You can see it here. It's actually a piece of code in C# language. This means I have way more possibilities than that I have in my XML definition. XML definition, so the protocol XML that we now have, XML will be a predefined structure with features that you can find, we'll include it in DIS as well, and you can find it in a nice manual, all the different features. But again, they are limited. We have tons of features, but it's limited to those features. If you want to build your custom flow, I want to parse this information in a specific way, then you can still use your quick actions. I want to run a bit more complex logic. So it's in the C# language, and we can always trigger it somewhere. So we have different types of quick actions. There's a lot to talk about on quick actions, and that's why we will have separate sessions specifically dedicated on quick actions. For now, I just want to mention that we can trigger this information. For instance, we're going to click on a button and I want to run a specific flow, which is defined in C# code. Well, I can link this via the triggers. Whenever I click on this particular button, button number 2, then I'm going to run this flow. It's there. We're not going to work with quick actions just yet. So let's have a look on the other components. So in my DIS tree, I can go to the next item, which is groups. Now, what is a group? I always consider it to be a to-do list. I can have many to-do lists. I could have one for tomorrow. I could have one for next year. I could even have my bucket list. Somewhere in my life, I would like to do something. So my groups is the same thing. As you can see, I can have multiple groups, and that's where all of my to-do lists are defined. In the template, there's always one group already present, and this is the after startup. So we already create a set of steps, what you need to do whenever you want to do something after startup. In this case, I have a group that will perform action number 2. So the to-do on my to-do list is just one item. It's saying, please perform the action number 2. And you can see here in the comments next to it, it's actually already stating what it will do. Where did it get these comments from? Well, I got it from the name in your action. You can use the paperclip to navigate to the content of that component, and then you can see your action here. It's going to run a specific param. Now, running a param doesn't really make sense, but what it will do is cause a change event on that parameter so we can trigger, for instance, our quick action that we just saw. Whenever there's a change, I will pretend I'm clicking on that button. I will run my logic. Groups, to-do lists. I can add extra items in here. I can have multiple to-dos on my list, or I can even have multiple groups. I can have multiple lists. Another component that we have, triggers. Of course, I would like to do something. I want to have interaction. When I click on the button, something must happen. Or after startup, in this case, when I'm started up, I would like you to do something. In that case, we have a trigger which will say on specific case, when do something. So on protocol, when after startup, I would like to do something. What? Well, I'm going to perform an action. What action? Well, the action with the number 1. What's action with number 1? I'm going to use that paperclip to navigate again. It will jump to this one. What will it do? Well, it will execute a to-do. What was my to-do again? Let's use the paperclip. It will go to my group number 2. Well, it will perform an action number 2, which will trigger that quick action. Now, there's a very good reason why we're not immediately running that quick action. We want to be sure that we're safely started up. It could be that my element, my protocol logic, is fully ready, but my system isn't ready to start interacting. So in my quick action logic, as I mentioned, we can do a lot of things. We could just simply do a counter. I'm going to calculate something, but I could be interacting with my system as well. And then my system must be ready. And by performing this sequence, after startup, execute to-do list. It's on my to-do. Whenever you're ready, the to-do list will be performed. The group will be executed. I'm going to run my logic. Okay, so don't change this setup. It's there already in the template for a very good reason. I want to start doing things when everybody's ready for it. What's the danger of not using this flow and directly running your logic? Well, when you are going to interact with the system and it's not ready, you could create a deadlock. It could be we're waiting on each other. Protocol wants to do something, but the system was still doing something. It can't work. And then your system is stuck. We want to avoid this at all costs. Do you want to have logic running after you've started up? Make sure the system is up and running. How do we do this? Well, we have a trigger. It will set something on my to-do list. What do I want to do? Well, whenever the system is ready, that thread will be running. My to-dos will be executed. What is my to-do itself? I have an action to force a change on a quick action, and the quick action will run. Lots of info already on the first session. Don't yet worry. The key of this is do not remove or change the setup. It's there for a reason. Now, another component that we have, so I already mentioned triggers action itself. We have timers. We can give a timer a nice name. We can give it, of course, a timing. Every X amount of time I would like to, again, do something. So it makes sense that the content of a timer will be a group. I would like to do something. To-do list were groups. So we will usually have 3 types of timers. Of course, always look at the situation. Before you start developing, you must think about the development. What is the purpose? What do I want to accomplish? What's the best way? And not just the best way, the most efficient way, and still keep it readable. Make sure that I can easily add something, or maybe disable something. Timers, same way. I don't want to put it too fast. Maybe I will send too many messages in a short period, overload my network. But if I would set it to slow, maybe I will not be updated enough. So pay attention on what the need is. Something that can help with this is this nice feature that we have, data display. You can see that there's two different values here. Well, actually, this timer will run its to-do every 1 minute. But if somebody is looking at it, there's a card open, it's looking at a data page, I'm going to retrieve the information faster. I'm going to run my to-do faster. How much faster? Well, instead of 1 minute, I'm going to do this every 30 seconds. So you can play around with it. You can make a condition kind of way. If somebody's really actively looking at this, there's a data page open, then I'm going to do it faster. If not, it's just in the background, it's okay to do it slower. Timers, every X amount of time, I'm going to do something. What is it to do? It's a group. There's also no point in making 2 times the same timer. We will all move it on the same thread. So it's like packages all on the same treadmill. If you would have another timer, it's all in the same queue. Port settings. So that's the other component. There's nothing yet in here. Why? Because this is very, very specific to what type of connection you're going to use. With port settings, we can set some default values in there, or we can even leave out boxes that we will get when we create a new element. Could be that you don't want to display a bus address box, for instance. It doesn't make sense to have it, so I'm going to define it in this port settings for this connection. Could be you have multiple connections, but for this connection, I don't want the bus address to be available whenever somebody's going to create a new element. Or I already want to set the port to a specific value. Or I would like to limit it. You can only set a port between this value and another value. It's not just a port, it's any type of property inside the connection attribute that you see in your element creation. I already briefly mentioned I could have multiple connections. This means my data source could have multiple interfaces as well. Or I could make a development that will link to different APIs. So I will have 2 ways to set my APIs, or 2 different parts to set my API properties. Default values already in the port settings. Last but not least, we have version history. Already mentioned, it's quite important to indicate what you have done, what the impact will be. Maybe I will need to be aware when you change range, you will lose all of your history. It's quite an important message there. Now this is XML. XML means that you can move around these components. So I could say, well, my version history, I'm going to move this to the top of my page. But we are human beings as well. We like some kind of a habit. I'm used to see my header on top, and I'm used to see my version history at the end. That means that I know if I want to know what name it is, I just make sure that I'm on the top. I can just make a shortcut, click the home page, the home button, make sure that I'm seeing the top one. Same for the version history. I want to see what the latest updates are. I will just click on my end and I will see all of my version histories. It's the same with all the components in there. XML, you can shift it around, data miner will still understand it. But we as a human being, while developing, you can create a habit. You're used to see something in a specific order. So I would also advise you not to just play around with the order, but try and keep it structured. The more you have a structure, the easier it will be to detect something. Go further with it.